Thank you everyone for coming. This is the Coaches Clinic. So we'll be covering a bunch of different aspects of the ethics poll, or at least giving you a brief overview. So we'll be discussing some rules and procedures, the judges' scoring rules, the event details, an overview of some ethical theories, which Ryan will be doing for us, a sample case, and we'll open it up at the end for some questions and answers. In front of you, you should find 3 copies. You can get a chance to staple them all together, but it's actually all one packet. And basically everything that's in the PowerPoint will be covered in that first portion. We also have some the ethical cases that they'll be using in the competition, as well as Ethics in a Nutshell by Matt Deaton, which should give you a broad overview of all the ethical theories. So is there any questions before we begin? Okay. So these are the time limit and point allotments for the particular rounds. The rounds will last 30 minutes, and teams may earn up to 60 points per judge per round. So per round there'll be 180 points total. There's 2 seeding rounds, which lasts for about 2 hours, 1 semifinal round, which lasts for an hour, and the final round, which also lasts for an hour. This is a sample of what a seeding round will look like. Copies of the case in question will be distributed to the teams and to the judges. The moderator will read the question. Then the first team has 2 minutes to confer and deliberate over the case. Then they have 5 minutes to present. So they get the moderator asks the question, they have 2 minutes to confer and deliberate, then 5 minutes to present, give their answer. Then team 2 has 1 minute to confer and deliberate about their presentation. And then they have 5 minutes to respond to the first team's presentation. Then team 1 has 1 minute to confer and 3 minutes to respond to that commentary. And it closes with 10 minutes of commentary between the judges and the students in the first team. Here are some rules concerning presenting. Your teams may elect 1 or more students to present, but you can use multiple students for multiple different cases. At the national level, they actually frown upon using the same spokesman for every case, so you may want to mix it up a bit. It shows diversity in the team, strength of the team. When one team is conferring or presenting or responding, the opposing team and audience has to remain silent. The teams may use personal timers to help stay within the time limits, but they can't time the opposing team. So they can use timers to help them stay on track, but they can't use them to time the opposing team. And in any case, the official time will be held by the moderators. Finally.
How many team members?
Yeah.
How many team members? 4? And so 1.
Is it, how many?
As few as 3, as many as 5 actually during the competition, and then you're allowed 2 alternates. So once they're seated at the table, it has to be those 3 to 5.
Okay.
But in between, you can switch the alternates in and out.
That's
and
right.
those 7 members that you bring with you have to be kind of your team all the way throughout. So
Okay.
you can't bring in new people that aren't on the roster. And things
Right.
like that.
Right. Thank you, Ryan. There is the use of notes is permissible, so students can write notes during when other students are presenting or conferring, deliberating, and so forth, but it has to be discreet, and they have to be somewhat quiet about it. Now, with regard to the use of ethical theory in presentations, this is the idea. The team should select those ethical theories based upon the kind of fit that ethical theory has to that team's point of view as it regards the case. So the theory should help the team articulate and explain their point of view about the case rather than be the answer to the case. So this is a rough format you could go by. So your team may express some belief. So they may believe some proposition X, that's the content of their belief, about whatever case is in question. And they can say that the theory supports or explains why their position concerning that issue is sound. And there'll be more on this in part 4. These are the judges' scoring rubrics. It's in 5 parts. Part 1 is the initial team's presentation. That's worth 15 points. Part 2 is the responding team's commentary. That's worth 10 points. Part 3 is presenting team's response to the opposing team's commentary, and that's worth 10 points. Part 4 is the presenting team's response to the judge's question. That's worth 15. And then, this is a new addition. They added Part 5, which the presenting points for the presenting team engaging in productive and respectful dialogue, as opposed to combative debate. So they'll be looking for civil tone. So these are the kinds of questions the judges will ask when they're scoring the teams. Was the presentation clear and systematic? Did the team clearly identify and thoroughly discuss the central moral dimensions of the case? Did the team's presentation indicate both awareness and thoughtful consideration of differing viewpoints, including or especially those that would loom large in the reasoning of individuals who disagree with the team's position? Part 2, they would ask the following kind of question. To what extent has the team effectively engaged the presenting team's argument? Part 3 would ask, how did the team respond to the opposing team's commentary? And Part 4 would ask, how did the team respond to the judge's questions? And last, again, Part 5 is a new category at the national level. And this is what they had to say about it, that the addition of the category for civil tone is intended to better encourage civil dialogue and distinguish ethics from debate. Here are the event details, the raw ones. So we'll be holding it Saturday, February 8th next year. It'll be held at the Crown Plaza Hotel in downtown Knoxville. Provisionally, it will be from 9:30 to 7:30 p.m. And there'll be complimentary lunch for all the coaches and team members. Parking. So free parking at the Market Square Garage. You can also park at the World's Fair Park. It's free for a couple hours. That might be for parents who are just sticking around for like maybe the opening and closing ceremonies. And then there's also parking at the Crown Plaza. Now, we made arrangements for free parking for 10 buses or small vans. So if you're going to use a bus or a small van for your team, let us know. And we'll make sure you get the token. That way the parking's free for you. But parking is available for anyone at $10 a day if you want to park at the Crown. Hotel accommodations. So if any of you are having to drive a significant distance, or if there are parents who want to stay in Knoxville the night before with their kids, the Crown Plaza will give a discounted rate. I think it's 15 to 25% off the rate. The Quality Inn, which is about 5-10 minutes from the Crown Plaza, they're offering a rate of 55, and the Red Roof Inn will give us a rate of 45. They're a little bit out more. They're out at Strawberry Plains, so that's about a 10-15 minute drive. So this is an overview of the ethical theories. I'm going to get it started, and then Ryan's going to take over. One of the aims of the Ethics Bowl is simply to get students to think critically about ethics. Thus, during the competition, we want to see students analyzing ethical cases and explaining their analysis in their own words. Nonetheless, ethics, the study of morality using the philosophic method, is an unfolding discussion, and some basic knowledge of what others have said is helpful for participating in this discussion. Simply put, some basic knowledge of the ethical theory can help students analyze ethical cases and explain their analysis in their own words.
Thanks, Don. So it might be old hat for those of you who have done this before, or if you have any sort of familiarity with philosophy. But what I'm going to do is just do a real basic overview of 3 of the most popular ethical theories, just to kind of give you an idea of how you might want to work with your students when going through these cases. So if this stuff is review for you guys, I apologize. But also, though, if there's any questions as we go along, please just throw up your hand, let me know, we can get some discussion going. So All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to refer to that case 13 as I go through these theories. Again, I'm just going to do the very basic kind of broad overview here. I'm not going to get bogged down in any specifics or any specific philosophers. But, again, feel free to ask questions as we go along.
Case 13 is the case on physician-assisted suicide.
Yes. All right. I assume if I hit the arrow key here, I'll go forward. Ha! All right. So when we're going through the cases here, and actually what I'll start here by doing, so I'm going to be very boring and just read off this case so we're all on the same page here. And this is what's going to happen during the competition as well. We'll have the moderator read off the case for the students so they all know what they should be discussing, in addition to having the materials in front of them. So case 13, physician-assisted suicide. Ethan Rimmel, a 41-year-old psychology professor and father of two, took a lethal dose of prescription sedatives June 13, 2011, and died shortly after. Ethan had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 1 year earlier. Deciding that he would control the time and place of his death, he contacted physicians in the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, hospital's Death with Dignity program. Once Ethan received additional medical opinions confirming that his cancer was indeed terminal, he received counseling and signed waivers. The SCCA provided Ethan with a lethal mix of prescriptions, medications that would painlessly end his life after he ingested them. Explaining Ethan's decision and actions, Grace Wang, his former partner, recalls that one of the things Ethan kept saying is he didn't want to deteriorate to the point where he couldn't interact with his kids. Dr. Elizabeth Loggers, medical director at SCCA, indicated that Ethan's wishes were not unusual. If you look at the way most Americans say they want to die, it is in their own home, with their family members present, not in pain, and with their mental faculties intact, she said. Since the passage of Washington State's 2009 Death with Dignity Act, Ethan and 240 other terminal patients within the state have chosen physician-assisted suicide, PAS for short, as a viable option for ending potential suffering and ensuring their deaths occurred peacefully, as pain-free as possible, and at a time and place of their choosing. Montana, Vermont, and Oregon are the only other states where PAS is legal. In 1994, Oregon became the first state to legalize PAS. Since that time, 1,050 terminal patients in Oregon have requested lethal medication, and 673 have died using it. According to Loggers, the most common reasons for patients to request PAS are loss of autonomy, an inability to engage in enjoyable activities, and a loss of dignity. Loggers asserts that patients are not making these decisions lightly. Each year, she says, there are over 50,000 deaths in Washington state, and cancer is the second leading cause of death. The number of who choose to participate in the Death with Dignity program is minuscule. 6 other states, including Pennsylvania, Hawaii, and Massachusetts, are also considering Death with Dignity provisions. Opponents of PAS programs, however, see Death with Dignity laws as a corruption of the ethical code of the health-caring profession, going all the way back to the Hippocratic Oath. A physician's job is to save lives, not end them, opponents say. I believe it's God's job to decide when someone should pass away, said Edward Chase, an outspoken opponent of PAS in Vermont. Others, however, fear that incorrect diagnoses could lead to unwarranted PAS procedures. Erica Ryle told Vermont Senate committees that she had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, only to learn later that the diagnosis was incorrect. How many other people are getting wrong diagnoses, she asked. Other opponents worry that terminal patients may be pressured into PAS procedures by family or friends who are unable to deal with the lingering demise of a loved one. On May 20th, 2013, Governor Peter Shumlin signed Vermont's Death with Dignity bill, making Vermont the 4th state where PAS is legal. All right, so that's our case. As you can see there's some study questions at the bottom. Every single one of the cases you have in your packet has study questions you can discuss with your teams. I'm not going to talk about those. What I'm just going to do is pick out some very broad kind of general points from this case that fit in with these 3 ethical theories that I'm going to give you a very broad outline of. So one of the reasons that's highlighted in here is the idea that people ought to be able to die with dignity, that they ought to be able to choose when their lives end, that they have some sort of right to lead their lives that they choose, and that includes when they end their lives. Right? This sort of reasoning, this reliance upon actions being inherently right, falls under a category that we call deontological theories. So for the deontologist, some actions are inherently right, and some actions are inherently wrong. And it really depends on which philosopher you're reading, what reasons they're going to give for those actions being right or wrong. I don't want to get bogged down in what philosopher says what, because that's not really the point of what we should be doing here. Really, I'm just trying to outline the theories so when you're working with your students, you can help them kind of pull out these intuitions and these theoretical leanings so they can help explain why they believe what they believe. The theory should come second to their explanation for what they're arguing given a certain case. But this is what the deontologist holds. Some actions are right, some are wrong. In this case, we have the example of a person having a right to end their life. If that right is deprived, that would be a bad thing to do. Therefore, we shouldn't do it. Another feature of deontological theories, for the deontologist, our feelings don't affect whether an action is right or wrong. So I might be morally repulsed by the idea of doctor-assisted suicide, but that feeling, that moral repulsion, does not affect the deontologist's point that some actions are just right and some actions are wrong. Similarly, the consequences of the actions don't affect whether or not it's right or wrong for the deontologist, or at least not primarily. For the deontologist, we ought to perform those actions that are inherently right, and we ought not to perform those actions that are not inherently right, or those actions that are inherently wrong. And again, I've just picked out one point here that helps to illustrate how students might think through their response using such a theory. Right? This idea that everybody has a right to choose when they die. There were others in there. One other one, and I'll just point this out before I move on to the next theory, is this idea that doctors are bound by the Hippocratic Oath, that they have an obligation to do no harm, to do otherwise would be wrong. Again, a sort of deontologist kind of reasoning. So if your students happen to pick up on those sorts of reasons, they're thinking in a deontological manner, and you can point them towards there to help them kind of work through their ideas, read some theory, and make their arguments and reasons more sophisticated. Make sense?
So the argument that said there was incorrect diagnosis, in other words, the consequence of that would be irrelevant to the deontologist?
All right, I need to... what I'm giving here is a extremely basic and almost caricature of the deontological theory. Of course, a sophisticated deontologist would have some sort of answer for that. However, at its most basic level in this kind of broad kind of understanding, consequences, at the very least, are not the primary reason why we determine it's right or wrong. Right? So my cartoon deontologist would say, no consequences, it doesn't matter. Right? But that would be unfair to real deontologists, but you know. But we will talk about consequences in a minute. Actually, it might be a good time to move on to that. Right? So, another type of theory you might want to point your students towards in helping them explain their answers to these cases is consequentialist theory. And here we have some examples. Chris has pointed out one here. I believe it was a woman from Vermont brought up this idea that some people can be misdiagnosed and told that they have a terminal illness. If we allow physician-assisted suicide, people with such diagnoses might go through with such suicide, even though they weren't actually terminally ill. The consequence here would be people would be dying unnecessarily, which I think for most of us would be a bad consequence. Another consequence we could point to, just to list one other on the other side of the debate, is the idea that by having a physician-assisted suicide, the pain of dying from these illnesses, these prolonged illnesses, and all of this pain that might pile up from living these last months of suffering, wouldn't occur. Right? The consequence would be that we would lessen the suffering of the person who has the terminal illness. Right? And for this sort of consequentialist argument that focuses on the lessening of suffering, we might have a justification for physician-assisted suicide. So again, we just have these kind of two opposing viewpoints, folks using the same sort of theoretical justification. So hopefully what this has demonstrated is that the consequentialist doesn't believe that actions are inherently right or wrong. So the consequentialist, unlike the deontologist, isn't going to come out the gate saying whether or not the dignity to die is something we should act upon. They're not going to come out the gate saying whether or not the Hippocratic Oath is something that we should definitely act upon. What they're going to do is look at an action, try to imagine the consequences that might follow from it, weigh up the good versus the bad. If the consequences are good, then we ought to perform the action. If the consequences are bad, we ought not to perform the action. So for the consequentialist, the rightness of an action is determined by its consequences. One thing to note here, which will be relevant for some of these other theories, for the consequentialist, the motivations for our action are besides the point. So for our deontologists, they might want to claim that right actions flow from some sense of duty, some sense of doing the right thing. The consequentialist is going to say, I don't care why you did it. You might be doing it because you think it's the right thing to do. You might be doing it because you think it's something evil and horrible and accidentally do something good. It doesn't matter why you did it as long as the consequences in the end come out to be a good thing, then it's a good action. So again, the consequentialist is concerned with the result of the action. So for the consequentialist, we ought to perform those actions that have the best consequences, and we ought not to perform those actions that do not have the best consequences or have the worst consequences. Any questions about that? All right. For those who are not new to this, can we guess what's going to be next? What our third theory might be?
Virtue ethics.
All right. So third and finally, virtue theory. Now, to be perfectly honest, going through this case that we have, I struggled to find an example from this case. So what I've chosen to do is to bring in an outside reason that's not listed here, which is something that you all are encouraged to do, not to just rely on these cases that we've given you, but actually have your students do some research on these topics. Of course, what we've given you here won't be all of the reasons why somebody might find a situation to be right or wrong. So we would encourage you to go and have your students do some research about each one of these cases. So what I found in my research, bye Morgan. Thank you. So what I found in my research, right, again, is an argument for and an argument against from this virtue ethics point of view. So we often hear, especially when we're looking at legal decisions, if we're looking at politicians arguing on the floor of Congress, we hear claims like, well, if we allowed things like physician-assisted suicide, we would encourage an attitude that lacked the proper respect for life. If we allow such practices, then people will not value life the way they ought to value it. We will create citizens who lack this virtue, right, of valuing the lives of those around them. On the other side, we might talk about those who want to encourage the virtue of compassion in themselves and those around them. So when we support things like physician-assisted suicide, when we empathize with these people who are dying from these illnesses, who are suffering, then we're encouraging those people around them to have compassion for their plight. And thus, hopefully, instilling this virtue of compassion. Again, these are just two examples I managed to find while looking at the news on Google. But hopefully these two different positions help to illustrate in some way what the virtue ethicist is trying to get at. The virtue ethicist is not so much concerned with actions, at least not in the first place. The virtue ethicist is more concerned with developing the right sort of character. So the virtue ethicist is not going to ask, at least not initially, they're not going to ask, what action should I perform? They're going to ask, what sort of person ought I be? And oftentimes when answering this question, they'll bring in the virtues, these moral characteristics that we think individuals ought to possess to be good people. So for the virtue ethicist, the virtuous and therefore ethical person is one who tends both to feel and to act in the appropriate ways in the appropriate situations, because they possess these virtuous character traits. So that rounds out the three theories that I wanted to bring up with you. Again, I realize that these are probably review for most of you. And it should also be said that these three, of course, are not the only three out there. There are lots of different ethical positions that one could take on any of these cases that your students are going to be asked to deliberate about. And these are just three to give you an example of how you might start working with your students and working through these cases.
Question.
Yeah.
Previously, in previous years, we've also added relationship-based ethics. Are we discouraging that or leaving it open?
Nope. I left that off for a couple of reasons. One, for the sake of brevity, I was just trying to have the three theories here. Another is my own ignorance. I'm far more familiar with these three theories than I am feminist ethics of care. Right? And I didn't want to give anybody the wrong impression of a theory that I'm not as adept as I am these theories. Right? So, by no way do I mean to discourage you guys from looking at feminist ethics, virtues of ethics of care, or any other sort of ethical theory. And actually, you'll see in one of the handouts that Don's given you, the ethics in a nutshell, the ethics of care, or the feminist ethics, are outlined in there, so to make up for my lack of knowledge. Other questions? All right. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful and wasn't too much review or too much of me running at the mouth. I think that's probably the end of the slides there. Let's see. Just a little overview there to sum up all of the things I was trying to say, right? And those, again, are on those slides that you guys have. So I'm going to turn it back over to Don.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. I'll make sure that the PowerPoint, I'll get that to Ryan, that way he can email it all out to you. So that essentially concludes what we had for you today for the clinic. And we'd leave it open for whatever questions or concerns you guys might have for us about the event, about the use of ethical theories in general, how to get help. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about, obviously we were avoiding talking about philosopher this, philosopher that. If we have students that are name droppers, should we discourage or encourage that if they are familiar with it in competition?
Good question. I don't think it would hurt.
Okay.
Would you, Ryan? And it might show a certain competency with the material. So in addition to understanding the concept, understanding where they came from. You know.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Of course, they want to avoid kind of like, well, Aristotle said this, so obviously it's true.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, dropping it in and saying, well, as Aristotle said, and
So good reasoning plus common.
Sure.
Would have said this or middle.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have graduate students who are willing to come out and help a team?
Yeah. Usually we have a whole batch of graduate students willing, but providing that we can't get someone individually out to you, me or Ryan will come out. And
That last part.
me or Ryan,
Oh.
yeah, well, I'll be happy to come out and help you guys out.
One of the many services.
Yeah, this is
Email y'all and say, hey, when
Absolutely.
we get you.
absolutely. Yeah, just email us, and our email addresses are in the packets. So, and we're pretty available, so we'll work something out.
I went to the website and I don't remember if this was on there or not. It was like while my kids were taking a test, so I couldn't click on too much. But do y'all have like a video of like a competition and action to see?
Yeah, I think
How
as
that
a matter
goes?
of fact.
Because I saw your team's picture where they had won. But if there were any videos on there, I didn't want to click on them because I didn't want noise.
Yeah, we don't have any video footage from the competitions we've done here at the regional level, but there is footage for stuff that's been done at the national level. And if you go to the Parkets Center's website, which should be on the back, National High School Ethics Bowl, if you go, it's number 9 on the links. If you go there, they should have some stock footage of an event. As a matter of fact, it would be worth watching the judges' scoring video too, because it goes through all the procedures the judges have to think about, and it shows like a sample interaction between teams and the judges. It'll give you a better idea of what to prepare for.
Actually, the competition itself, I haven't done it before, like, how many, the teams, how many competitions or rounds can each team expect to participate in? I mean, it's an all-day affair, right? But
Yeah, so there'll be the 2 seeding rounds, and also all teams will get to present and comment on someone else's presentation once per round. So there'll be a total of 2 presentations and 2 commentaries in the seeding rounds. And then the highest scoring teams will move on to the semifinal rounds and then to the final rounds.
so you might be finished, in other words, about after that first round.
Yeah.
That way, then pare it down.
Yeah.
But you get at least 2, in other words, every team will get at least two rounds to present.
That's right. Yeah. Good question.
As far as the substitutions go, do you decide who your team is and then they tell you what case you're being given, or do they say this is the case, what team members do you want up there?
Oh, I see. Yeah, good question, Ryan. How's that usually been done in the past?
The way we did it in the past is the team would seat at the table, and then we would pass out. So
That's how they do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Assisted suicide.
Well, that's what I was
That
like.
was a great question.
Do you
Yeah, I
want
was
to
thinking
train certain people for certain ones, or do they all need to be trained on everything?
Yeah, good. Yeah, and that's certainly one kind of tack you can take, right? You can go into it in advance, planning out certain ways of responding to it, namely by getting the students to find their own voice about it, and then using ethical theory to sort of support and ground, what they're having to say.
What we've found in the past is usually a student will tend to like a certain theory better. And so you may have one student that is more of a deontologist, another one who may be more into wellness care. And to provide those differing levels of voices can be helpful.
Yeah, and actually, there might be a temptation to like specialize in like one school of ethical thought, like virtue ethics or the like. But it would probably look much better to the judges if you've got different voices and different theories being presented to them, that they're not simply parroting the same theory over and over again. Good. Other questions? If you guys can't think of any good questions, we're always available by email. They were all good questions. All right, well, that's all we have for you this evening, folks. We appreciate you coming out. Again, if you want us to come by and visit your school or sit down with your students and you and help you go through some of these ethical theories, we'd be happy to do so. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.